Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Sydney, and today's video is one that I'm pretty darn excited about because today we're going to be talking about eyeshadow palettes. So I started my eyeshadow palette collection series a couple of weeks ago with my indie eyeshadow palette collection. I can link that down below if you guys missed that video, but I thought today we would continue on with my affordable palettes. I'm going to keep this intro super short because I have a lot of them. This portion definitely makes up the bulk of my collection, and as far as categorizing things as affordable, I kind of did it like, if it's on the drugstore side of Ulta, I considered it affordable. I think you can get almost all of these palettes at Ulta actually, but there are one or two that you would have to order online, which is why I didn't want to strictly call this just drugstore, because it's, when I think of drugstore, I think of something that I can walk into Ulta or Walmart or Walgreens or Target and buy that day. So I'm not going to blabber on any further. Let's hop into it. So as I did last time, I'm going to try to group the palettes that if I have more than one from a brand, I'm going to try to list them together. So there's one brand in particular that makes the bulk of my collection. If you guys can guess that, leave it in a comment down below. I would love to know if you guys are right. But first, I thought we would chat about my Makeup Revolution palette. So I bought these two palettes, I feel like pretty close together. The first palette that I bought from Makeup Revolution was the Emily Edit palette. They did this one in collaboration with Emily Noel. I adore her. I've been watching her channel for years and years and years, and when she came out with the collab, I was like, I want to buy that to support her. I bought it, and I think the color story is incredible. She did an amazing job curating this color story to make it really diverse, but also really approachable. The formula is not my absolute favorite. It's not a bad formula, but it's just not as pigmented as what I normally like to work with. I find that these shadows require a lot of building, and the shimmer shades tend to be a little bit fussy. They're a little bit harder pressed, so I feel like I really have to dig my finger in there to really get the pigment I want, and even then layered over a glitter glue, it's just not as good as some of the other shimmer shades I have in my collection. The other palette that I have from them is the Velvet Rose palette. This one is quite obviously a dupe for the Soft Glam palette, and that's 99% of the reason why I bought it. I tried the formula in the Emily Edit palette first. I'm like, you know what, this is pretty good. I wasn't super filled with it, but I wasn't super disappointed either. I'm like, you know what, I've really wanted to try Soft Glam for so long, but I couldn't justify the price point of Soft Glam, so I paid $7 for this one. It's one of their Reloaded palettes. It's, I think I already said, the Velvet Rose palette. So this one's pretty, but it definitely wasn't a need. Next up, we have a palette that's gotten a lot of love over the past year and a half or so, and that is the e.l.f. Mad for Matte 2 palette. This one, I've been hearing incredible things about the Mad for Matte palettes on YouTube for quite a while before I purchased this one. I think I bought it on a whim one day. I feel like I was shopping for stuff for my dorm room. So I've had this palette for a couple of years at this point. And this was actually my Pan That palette for last year. As you guys can see, I wasn't totally successful. I only hit pan in about 3 shades, but it was my first attempt and I learned a lot from it. So this is one that I really do enjoy from e.l.f. I'm dying to try one of those bite-sized quads, but I just can't decide which one I want, or if I just want to wait until they come out with more shades. I haven't quite decided yet. Another palette from the drugstore that I have is the Milani Pure Passions palette. You can't really even see this one because it's so crazy reflective. This is like their warm rusty palette. I feel like these were super duper hyped up on YouTube a couple of years ago. People were raving about them. I think it's a good palette. I don't think it's fantastic though. I feel like the mattes are really where the formula is at in this palette. They're very buttery, very smooth. They blend out really nicely. The shimmers leave a little bit to be desired. But my main problem with this palette is that I struggle with a lot of creasing whenever I wear these shadows. I haven't gotten rid of it yet because I feel like if I'm just filming a video or if I'm only going to wear my makeup for a couple of hours, this palette is fine to wear. But if I'm going to put in a full work day or a full school day plus work, this is really not the palette that I'm reaching for. The next palette that I wanted to chat about is the Bad Habit Cult Mania palette. So I don't know if you guys remember Bad Habit. It was a dupe brand that came out 3 or 4 years ago. I feel like it was very popular on YouTube for a little bit. It was only available on, oh, what is that website called? There was like a certain app, I think it was called Shop Wish or something, or no, maybe not Shop Wish. I don't know. There was a specific app that you had to purchase it through, and this palette in particular is a dupe of the Pat McGrath Mothership palette. I think it's the Bronze Seduction palette. That one I just totally fell in love with. I thought the color story was incredibly beautiful, but it was so incredibly pricey. There's no way I could ever justify that price point, so I bought the dupe thinking, hey, this will kind of satisfy my urge to try that one. I don't think it really did that because the formula on here is, I don't think it's anything comparable to Pat McGrath. I've never tried Pat McGrath shadows. The metallics in here are actually really pretty. These three, well these four really, are a little bit flakier because they're a little bit more glittery, which personally I don't really mind. I'd pop everything over glitter glue anyways, so I don't mind that they're a little bit flakier. But the mattes in here are not my favorite. They're just tonally really deep, and for me personally, I need some more blending tones on my fair skin. There are two satin shades in here. I always feel kind of meh about satin shades. They never really make me super excited either way, so I mean, it's kind of a meh palette for me, but I really only keep it for these shades right here, these beautiful chunky glittery shades. Maybe I should depot this palette. Maybe that'll be another video. Next up, I have two palettes from BH Cosmetics. I have their Festival Weekend palette, or Weekend Festival, I always flip it for some reason, and the Royal Affair palette. So I'm going to make a bold claim, you guys, and I'm going to say that these two palettes are from the golden age of BH Cosmetics. These are my only BH Cosmetics palettes, and after trying these two, I was absolutely infatuated with the brand. I was really closely following what they were releasing, and I just feel like everything since these two palettes has been meh, color story wise. I know the Daisy Marquez palette did really well. I was interested in that one. I'm trying to think if there are any other ones. The past two festival palettes they released have just been super meh for me. But this one, I totally fell in love with. I actually bought this on a whim from Ulta. I think it was freshman year, my finals, or it was like finals week freshman year, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna buy a palette to treat myself. And so I bought this one, and I just totally fell in love with it. This was when I was just starting to get into color, and I love the balance of neutral and colorful shades in this palette. I feel like they give you the right tones and the right finishes of colorful shades to really easily integrate them into your looks without feeling like too self-conscious or like not really knowing a whole lot about color and eyeshadow. I think the formula on these shadows is fabulous. The shimmers are really pigmented, the mattes blend out really well. I just love this palette. I know everyone and their mother raved about this palette when it came out years ago, but it was for good reason. The Royal Affair palette was one that I feel like really snuck under a lot of people's radar, and when I first saw this palette, I think I saw it on like Trend Moon, and I was like, it's okay, it's not fantastic. I wasn't super impressed. And then I placed an order with BH Cosmetics. I think it was like Black Friday or something, or maybe it was like just after Christmas, because I was ordering some of their brushes, and I think I threw this palette in on a whim because I'm like, you know what, that's kind of pretty. I kind of want to try it. I so enjoy the Weekend Festival palette, and so I grabbed this one and I got it home, and I absolutely love this palette. I think it has a beautiful range of cool tone neutrals, warm tone neutrals, and some subtle pops of color. It's very fall friendly, but I just feel like overall it has a really fantastic color story. And again, the formulas in here, mattes are very pigmented and blend well, shimmers are very metallic and beautiful. Alright you guys, now we have two palettes from Morphe, and I think it's pretty safe for me to say that these are going to be my last two palettes from Morphe for quite a long time. They've done some shady things business practice wise lately, and honestly every single time I try their shadows, besides the Jaclyn Hill palette, I'm just really let down by the quality. So the first palette obviously that I have is the Jaclyn Hill palette. This is the original one. I did briefly consider buying her volume 2 palette, but I ultimately just decided that I didn't really need it. Even though I really do love those colors, I just don't really prefer a palette this size anymore, but ultimately I just decided that I didn't need it. This one I do really love. I feel like when I bought this palette, I loved these colors. I was using them all the time. I used this palette for like 4 months straight, and I hardly touched any of my other palettes, so I don't really regret this purchase, but if I were to consider making this purchase again right now, I don't think I would. Next up, we have the 35M Boss Mood palette from Morphe. This is the one that I tried after I tried the Jaclyn Hill palette. I think I tried them several months apart. Maybe it was about a year apart. And I'd seen some reviews on this one. I'd heard that it was good quality, and so I ran to my Ulta. I swatched it in stores, and I was like, yeah, this feels pretty good. And so I brought it home, and I started playing with it. And the more that I played with it, the more that I was like, this is not the same formula as the Jaclyn Hill palette. And maybe looking back, I should have done a little bit more research into the formula of this palette, but I was just really let down by the quality of these shadows. They work fine. They're not terrible, they're not unusable, which is why this palette is still in my collection, but they're just not great shadows, you know? Alright you guys, I apologize if you can hear some like whirring in the background. It sounds like someone's cutting something outside of my apartment. I don't really know what's going on. But now we are on to the brand that I mentioned in the beginning that makes up a majority of my affordable palettes in my collection. So if you guys haven't guessed, pause the video and put it in my comments down below. But that brand is Colourpop, and I'm sure you guys all saw this coming. I have a lot of Colourpop palettes. I discovered Colourpop in, I want to say 2015 or 2016. I did a whole video recently roasting my past Colourpop purchases. I can link that down below if that would be something that you guys would be interested in seeing. But I've accumulated a lot of palettes from them over the years, whether I've bought them myself, received them as gifts. I just really love Colourpop, and I'm going to make a bold statement. I don't know if I love them as much anymore. I still think that they release a lot of really cool products and beautiful products at a very affordable price point, but I feel like indie makeup really has them beat right now, at least in my heart. So I'm not going to blabber on too much further because we've got a lot of palettes to go through. So I have quite a few of their 9-pan palettes. The first one that I have is the Strawberry Shake palette. This one is so stinking adorable, you guys. How beautiful are these tones, especially for this time of year? I really truly enjoy this palette. I love how pigmented and saturated these tones are. This one's a great one. I'm not really going to touch on the formula a whole lot between these palettes unless I have something bad to note, because Colourpop's formula is pretty consistent across the board. Next up, I have the Orangey Glad palette. And these are just my tones. I am so excited it's finally inching its way into summer, because I am going to be reaching for this palette all summer long. I love really saturated, really warm orangey eye looks. I think they really set off my blue eyes really nicely, and this is the perfect little palette to create those looks. I know some people really do not like pressed glitter. I don't really feel too strongly one way or another about it. I mean, like, I know that I need to be super careful with it around my eyes, but it's never a deal breaker for me in a palette. Next, we have the Honey palette. I actually won this palette in a giveaway. Oh, that's lovely. Some eyeshadow just flew out. It arrived broken, so I did have to repress a few of these shades. I really do like this palette. I don't think I would have bought it myself and spent my own money on it, but since I won it in a giveaway, I do enjoy it. I do feel like maybe it could have been condensed into like a 6-pan palette, because some of the yellows in here, once you get them on your eyes, they look super similar, but some of these shimmer shades are cool, and I do like the pressed glitter. Next up, we have the Brown Sugar palette. This palette really caught me by surprise. When it launched, I was like, oh, that's pretty. I don't really need it. And then I went to my cousin's house, and she had this palette, and I was swatching it and playing with it. I'm like, oh my god, what did they do to the formula in this palette? I feel like this palette, the mattes in here and the shimmers are so creamy and pigmented and buttery. Colourpop did something a little bit extra special with these shades, and not only is the color story absolutely beautiful, but the formula is like top notch even for Colourpop. Okay, now I have my two 9-pan palettes of shame. These were totally impulse buys, you guys. I bought these on Black Friday last year, and I saw them in Ulta of all places, actually. I was shopping not where I normally shop, and that Ulta was carrying Colourpop, so I was like, oh my god. And I just seen Frozen 2. And so these are the Frozen 2 palettes. I got the Anna palette and the Elsa palette. The Anna palette is really warm and has kind of some like rich autumnal tones in it, and the Anna palette, or not the Anna palette, and the Elsa palette is a little bit more cool toned. It has like some nice cool toned mauve shades and a pink and some purples. I know some people really hated these palettes, but I really like them. I didn't really have any issues formula wise with them, at least not yet, and I don't really regret buying them because I have an obsession with Frozen 2. I'm not even going to tell you guys how many times I saw it in theaters. It was 3, okay? It was 3. Alright, you guys, now we are on to their 12-pan palettes, and these are definitely the bulk of the Colourpop palettes that I've had. I feel like this size of eyeshadow palette has been around in their collection for the longest, so it would make sense that I have the most of them. So I'm not really going in chronological order with any of these. I feel like I should have said that at the beginning of when I purchased them, but I'm just kind of going with in the order that they're stacked. So the first one that I have is the Zodiac palette from Colourpop. This one was a collaboration with Kathleen Lights, and this one was definitely an impulse buy. I was so infatuated with Dream Street. I was so happy to have it in my collection. I loved the formula so very much. And so when Kathleen was coming out with another one, I was like, of course I'm going to buy it. I'm going to love that one just as much. And if I were to make this purchase today, I don't know if I would have bought this palette, but I do enjoy having it in my collection. I think one day I may depot this one and just use it as singles, but keep the packaging because the packaging is stunning. But yeah, it's definitely not my favorite Colourpop palette, but it's not a bad Colourpop palette either. Ooh, now we have the palette of the season, and of the season I mean like I wear these tones a lot in this season, and that is the Sweet Talk palette from Colourpop. This one blew up last summer, and I resisted it so hard for so long. Again, when I saw the sneak peek for this one, I was like, I don't need that, that's boring. And I talked myself out of it, and I talked myself out of it, and then people started to get the palette in and create looks with it, and I was like, oh, I love that one. So I waited for a sale and I finally grabbed it, and I have no regrets with this palette. I think it is so beautiful. These tones are absolutely my favorite to wear during this time of year, and so I know this is a workhorse summer palette for me. Next up we have Dream Street from Kathleen Lights and Colourpop once again. So this palette holds a really special place in my heart because it was my first pressed shadow palette from Colourpop, but also this was the palette that I featured in my YouTube comeback video. I don't even know what to call it. I started a YouTube channel this summer before I went off to college. I moved into the dorms and I didn't have anywhere private to film, so I just stopped filming for several months, and then some things happened with my living situation and I was able to film several months later, and so the first video that I filmed when I came back was a review on this palette. So this one holds a very special place in my heart, and this is just like one of my favorite Colourpop palettes all around. I think the color story was beautifully curated by Kathleen Lights, and I really love this one, you guys. Give It To Me Straight was definitely another impulse buy from Ulta from Colourpop, but this is really a workhorse everyday palette for me. I feel like I can just create an everyday look with my eyes closed with this palette, and I really don't have to think about it. I don't have to fuss with it too much, and for that I really enjoy it. Next up I have the Whatever palette from Colourpop, and this one was actually a gift, and I'm so happy to have it in my collection because this color story is just so me. But I couldn't justify adding it to my collection, like spending my own money on it, so I was so excited to receive it as a gift. To the extent that I play with this palette, I really do enjoy the formulas and the color story. I think they're all really, really beautiful. Ooh, next up we have the She palette from Colourpop, and this is one that I hemmed and hawed over for so many years before I finally took the plunge. I think I waited for a sale, and this one was pretty steeply discounted. I actually bought this palette with the intent of depotting it, but I got it home and I started using the color story and the shadows together, and I was like, I can't depot this one. I love it. I always recommend this palette to people who are like, I love warm tones, but I want to get into more color. I feel like this is a great little stepping stone palette because, as you can see right here, the peach red, purple, and like orange soda type shade, these are like almost neutrals in my head, and so I feel like if you have those key mattes to play with and then you have just kind of more neutral-ish shimmers, I feel like that's a really great stepping stone and an easy way to get into color. Okay, this was another Colourpop palette that like haunted my dreams for months until I bought it, and that is the Good Sport palette. I had a love-hate relationship with this palette because at first I was like, what am I going to do with this color story? And then of course I saw swatches, I saw looks. Do you guys see a theme here? And I just totally fell in love with this palette, you guys. I love the color story so much. The formula on this one can be a little bit temperamental to work with. The purple is just a little bit powdery, and this green right here can be just a little bit patchy. You just have to be careful with it and layer it up slowly. But otherwise, I really enjoy this one. I don't know why Colourpop got rid of it, and I'm really, really hoping that they'll do kind of like a revamped Good Sport palette in this upcoming fall. Alright, you guys, we've got 3 palettes left, and these are the only big Colourpop palettes that I have. I haven't really purchased their bigger palettes a whole lot because, as I said, I just don't really prefer the bigger palettes. I think the smaller, more curated color stories are a little bit more my speed. But I have accumulated a couple over the years. The first palette I have is the Misunderstood palette. This one is probably the Colourpop palette that I regret purchasing the most. I bought this one and I bought it with the intention to review it, and then this was the palette that it kind of just clicked for me that I can't buy mainstream releases, especially when other YouTubers are getting them sent like months in advance with the intention of reviewing them and thinking that that's going to be something good for my channel, like it's going to super boost my channel. Because I felt like by the time I got this palette, I had already watched 10 reviews on this palette, and I was like, well, do I really have anything interesting or something that'll add value to the conversation? And I felt like I didn't, and so that's why I don't purchase Colourpop palettes on launch day to review them. Plus, I feel like I was just buying this to review it and not really for my own love of the color story. The sneak peek photos of this palette were a little bit misleading because at first we had pictures of this palette in an Ulta catalog and some of the colors looked really different, and I feel like I just really got sucked into the hype and bought it for review purposes, not for my own love of the color story. This next palette may be my favorite Colourpop palette. The jury's still out because I am very indecisive, but this is the Through My Eyes palette. This one was created in collaboration with I Live Sarah He, and this is one that I just drooled over for months and months and months, and this was at the point where I was taking a little bit of a break from Colourpop because I was just placing an order like 2 or 3 times a month, and I was like, that is too much, you need to slow down. So When this palette came out, I was on my break and I was like, that's really, really gorgeous. I did a Shop My Stash for Dupes video with it, but I was absolutely infatuated by this palette, so I waited a couple months until I felt like enough time had passed, and the next time that Colourpop had a sale, I sprung for it and I grabbed this palette, and I have enjoyed using it so much. I think they did a wonderful job curating the color story, and this is just one of my favorites. The final affordable palette I have in my collection is the So Jaded palette. This was another one where I really went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to ask for this palette for Christmas or even just consider purchasing it myself because of the size, but I feel like because these pan sizes are a little bit smaller, it's less overwhelming for me than like a Morphe palette. I really enjoyed this palette, you guys. I love how diverse the color story is. I think Kathleen did a really great job curating the color story. I mean, as much as you can for a 30 pan palette, but I definitely do not regret adding this one to my collection. So that's actually going to wrap this video up, you guys. I know I really breezed through all those. I just didn't want this video to be too long. So I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you found it helpful. If I've done videos on any of these palettes recently, I will link them down below. So if you guys are looking to learn more about the palettes or anything like that, the information will be in the description box below. But that's going to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next one.